The least expensive cars that we discussed are both gas-powered. They both have continuously variable transmissions. They are essentially things that will not bring you joy in any way other than perhaps knowing that you didn't pay a lot of money. That's about it. But the other side of it is, and there is a reality here, they're cheap to insure, they're cheap to run, they're cheap to keep, and they're cheap to buy.
Where have all the affordable cars gone?
They're nearly gone.
Nearly gone, or they're gone?
They're nearly gone.
So let's be clear here. When you say they're nearly gone, what do we still have left that is considered affordable?
I would say, first of all, what do you consider affordable? And I would say sub $20,000 vehicles for people who are scraping by and need to buy, for some reason, a brand new car, sub $20,000.
Let's frame this in a different light.
All right.
What is the average income, personal income, in the U.S.? Now, it's 2022 when we're shooting this, so that data would have been compiled for 2021.
I agree with that. Although I don't agree with this number. The number is $63,214.
Now, huge provision here. It varies depending on where you get that information. We're getting that from the Department of Labor, I believe. Different sites you go to, we've seen it as high as 67. We've seen it as low as, I think, low 60s. But 63 was the number that came up a lot. Now, here's the real question. What's the average cost of a new car in that same period?
According to this, $47,148.
Okay, so a couple of pieces of information there. That number has gone up from $35,000 in 2 years. That's a huge jump.
That's a massive jump.
So I have compiled. Actually, I didn't compile data for this specific episode, but I did compile data for one of my speaking engagements, and it was to an institutional investor, and we talked about this information, specifically affordability. So this was something I did a couple of years ago where I chatted. Actually, this wasn't for an institutional investor. This was for a group of marketers. And I got this data from, it's U.S. Census data. And what this is telling us, granted, you'd think this is a story about Chevrolets. This is not a story about Chevrolets. This is a story about snapshots in time. 1976, 1986, 1996, 2006, and 2016. And the two important pieces of data, really three important pieces of data we're looking at here, is what was the average income in that respective year, but what was the average price of a car in that respective year. And the reason why I wanted to share this with you before you tell us what affordable cars are available, look at how the number's gone up.
And they are stating that the average income then was $52,250. So the average income has gone up by about $11,000.
From 2016, yet we've had, for the past 2 years, depending on really the data you're going off of, inflation's anywhere from 9% in like food and rent to 40% for cars and housing. And it's only gone up $11,000 in 6 years.
That is one of the major points. And what your graph and your information is not showing is also the lower half of the population who do not make this. I mean, even
who do not make this, exactly.
Yeah, there's combined households that won't make this much money, that work at fast food restaurants.
I think we should add a little color to this discussion, and it's based on the lunch we just had.
Okay.
So I'm visiting you from California, and I don't think I would shock anybody by saying California is an expensive place to live.
Remarkably expensive.
Not as expensive as New York City, not as expensive as London, but expensive.
Right.
So normally when I go to a place, even like Colorado, which is not like as cheap as going like Dallas, I don't think twice about, well, how much is a beer or how much is a burger?
Right.
You took me to this local place in Boulder, which the food, very good. It's like a knockoff of the Wiener Circle in Chicago.
Yeah, I'd say it's in the same zone.
You know, Italian beef, hot dogs, burgers, greasy spoon, nice place. Our lunches were $40. It would have been cheaper for us to get on United, fly first class to Chicago, and got a black car down to the Wiener Circle. Would have paid less and still had entertainment from Poochie there.
And then on top of that, they wanted to charge for anything you wanted with like additional condiments. For instance, a little tiny cup of ranch that you asked. They said, yeah, there's a charge for that. Now, I should point out a few things.
And a refill. They charge you 50 cents for a refill.
This is not Colorado. This is Boulder.
I guess it's just a rule that I've followed for most of my life. When you leave New York or LA or London, everything's cheaper. And here's a point where it wasn't. And the reason why I'm telling you this whole thing, why I'm bringing it up to the audience, the people that work there, are they making $63,000 a year?
Absolutely not.
So how can they afford the average car? And we're really going to this. If this number here, last time I checked this, was 64% of the average income to buy the average car. Now, if I'm doing the math, what is it, 75%?
I would say that's about right.
So in 6 years, it's increased over 10 points.
Yes.
Percentage points.
Now, let's look at what's currently available today, because I'm about product, whereas you're about numbers to a certain degree. So as much as we hate to admit it, there are a lot of vehicles out there that are still available for those people who have a much lower income and are trying to get themselves a new car. Now, in many cases, these are fleet vehicles, and so let's say you're struggling, you need to populate your fleet with vehicles on a runabouts. They exist. An example of that would be a Mitsubishi Mirage, as much as you hate them, very simple, basic transportation.
3-cylinder, terrible car.
Terrible car with excellent fuel mileage, some of the best in its class. Actually, the best fuel mileage out there that's a non-hybrid.
What is it?
52 miles per gallon is its highest rating.
That's pretty good.
It's extraordinary. But it also doesn't weigh anything. But you do get standard amenities, including satellite radio is standard. That's not standard in a $60-something thousand pickup truck.
My question would be, would you die if you get into an accident in that car?
No, its ratings, I mean, are on the average side in some cases. Remember, they have to go through a lot of hoops in order to sell that car here in the United States. Department of Transportation requires that it exceeds a certain level, or else it's out there to the public. Hey, this thing sucks and it needs to be better.
Yeah.
And which is, I think, a benefit. But on the other side, because of that, it weighs it down, and as such, it has no power. But we're not talking about frills. I don't care about that stuff. I'm just referring to people who make very low income and what these vehicles are worth. And so around $15,000, really realistically $17,000 can get you one.
So what other choices would be available in those realms?
Only one right now, because General Motors just discontinued, as of this month, or last month actually, the Chevy Spark, which was in that same realm. And by the way, the best out of all of them in terms of driving dynamics in my book. And that's not saying much, though. And that would be the Nissan Versa, which gives you a lot of car for the money, to be fair. But there are no options for a 5-speed manual. I don't believe they do that anymore on that car.
And they still manufacture and sell this car in the U.S.?
Yes.
Because that car, when it first came out, I remember was like $11,000 U.S.
Yeah. It was the least expensive. Now it's around, I think the least expensive one hovers around $16,000 realistically. And that is absolute bare bones. But once again, just like the Mitsubishi, you are spending $17,000 to really get one. And that's, once again, bottom line. So that is on the lower end, and that is sub $20,000. And there are very few vehicles out there that have that price. There is an exception that just went away. That exception is unusual because Ford, believe it or not, managed, and it's not a car because they're done with cars. It's a truck, sort of. Ford, when they introduced the Maverick, they brought it out as a front-wheel drive little trucklet with a hybrid powertrain. Actually, pretty sophisticated stuff.
And the hybrid's only on offer with a front drive.
That is correct. And it gets like 40 miles per gallon, and their base price was around $20,000.
Has it changed?
Yes, it's gone up. Everything's gone up a percentage. But the real thing is you can't get the truck. You see, right after the first 2022s came out, the order books were closed because they just absolutely sold out. That's what happened again. It took only a few weeks.
Even the higher price?
Pretty much. Well, with the exception, I believe, of their absolute top tier ones, you pretty much can't get one.
But what is the price increase? They went from 20. What's the basic, most cheapest, cheap seats price?
It's going to be, realistically, it's going to still be in the low $20,000 zone.
That's if you could get one.
That's if you can get one, but that's the point, is that you can't.
You can't. Okay, so let's go into a different direction here. What's the average price of a used car in the same time period we're discussing?
Well, that's the crazy part because it really hovers between, say, $23,000 and $33,000.
That's a huge amount to hover.
Yeah, and then but it's up like $10,000. Now, bear in mind that is based on what you see on
Because
a
of the
lot.
craziness over the past two years.
Right, supply and demand. So there's a lot of people out there who realize I cannot afford or wait to get my car because of the parts slowdown and everything else that's happened. They have to get some cars. They get a used car. And paying $33,000 for a used car. And we're talking used. We're not talking. And used, I tend to qualify as something that's more than 3 years old. I think that's a fair qualification. You're spending an awful lot of money on them, and more than ever
So you're
before.
saying that 2 years ago, the average price was 23 of a used car, and with all the things that happen in money supply, the economy, it's gone up to 33,000.
That would be a fair assessment.
And just let's give them a little bit more.
That's an
color.
average, by
That's
the
an
way.
average. Yeah, these are all averages. Like, of course, if you go find your buddy down the street that's got a 2006 Ford F-150, you're going to pay less to him because you're going to do a deal together where a dealership's going to charge you more because, they got more customers and they can get you financing. I feel like I want to add a little color as to why the prices of used cars jumped so much. Because if you think about it, new cars, it was in the mid-30s and now it's gone up to 47.
Mm-hmm.
Used cars went from 23 to 33, as you're saying, and that was a big function of everything is cyclical. So a lot of good, better, and different, whether I agree with it or not. Most people know I don't agree with leasing. Leasing is a way to continually supply used cars to the used car market. Notice they're always 3-year leases. It's rare you get them 4 or 5 years. They get them 3-year leases, and no matter if it's fancy cars or cheap cars, and the idea is to get them back on the dealers and resell them to that market that can't afford the new car. And that was humming along just fine until March 2020, and then new car sales fell off a cliff by half, which means there's less new cars on offer, which means there's less used cars going into the funnel, which means even the people that had to buy cars, like you and I didn't need to buy a car, so we would hold off our purchase.
Yeah, but we didn't have an accident or have a theft or something like that,
But the
right?
person, still 9 million of those people a year still need a car.
Precisely.
So the folks who were looking, I want to buy a new car, they actually were pushed into the used car market, even though they didn't want to be.
Well, this is where things get crazy because if you look at the pattern of a lot of these used cars, some of them were selling for the same price, if not more in some cases.
If not more, yes.
Than what they were new.
Crazy.
Which is insane.
And I had a friend of mine, or I should say, I have a friend of mine. He moved. He was one. I think he was the only person that was able to sell his condo in Dumbo and not lose money during the virus. Did like every other person from Brooklyn and went to Austin. He wanted to buy a car, and he's not a car guy. He's very short, but he and his wife are these cute little short people,
Right?
And they don't know barely how to drive.
Okay.
And he said, "Well, what should I get?" I said, "You only have one choice. You're getting a Lexus RX." Why? Because I'm going to be tied to this car for the rest of its life. And if anything goes wrong, you're going to call me because
Right.
you're this paranoid, nebbishy guy.
So was it a 350 that you got?
Well, I told him just go find the cheapest RX 350. Turns out the lease special with the small screen, no sunroof, they were $47,000. Base price, it was $43,000 when it was new. So I ended up letting him get a Mazda CX-9 because I got the friends and family through Dave Coleman.
Oh, well, there you go.
That's what it turned out to be.
Yeah,
So-
and it's not a half bad vehicle.
It's not exactly.
It's got good
Wouldn't
power.
call it affordable. It was what is it? It was $40,000.
Still.
Yeah.
I mean,
So let's look at this in a little bit. Let's add some more color to this.
please.
Electric cars. Is there such a thing as an affordable electric car? Because
Yes.
our government is telling us, hey, gas prices are going up. Just go and get an electric car.
For a new car, not so much. Used cars is a different story, and I'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
I actually have a personal example. The least expensive electric vehicles that are currently available basically are Chevy and Nissans. That's the Nissan Leaf base model, not the Plus, and the Chevy Bolts. Not the Bolt EUV, which is the larger one, but the
Yeah.
Bolt. They've managed to completely push themselves out of the tax credit. We're not going to go into that, where that's going and what it is. and
Because they
everything else.
sold so many.
Right.
Yes.
So, Chevrolet, right now, they are hovering in the low $30,000 zone. Bolt.
Bolt
Okay?
EUV.
No, Bolt.
Regular Bolt.
Regular Bolt.
Didn't they stop making that?
It's still in production, but it will be going away. We estimate within the next 2 years. There are issues. We're not going to go into the problems and all the other stuff, the battery, but that's not part of this. Then you have Nissan with the Nissan Leaf. The base model Nissan Leaf, not the Plus, which gives you well over 250 miles, I believe.
Yep.
But with the smaller battery, $27,000 and change. Realistically, 28 to
Was it
29.
150 miles of range?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's not
pretty
very
bad.
good. But for around town, it's
That's
adequate.
what it is. It's a city car.
It really is. But and then between the two of them, which one's better and all that, that's a whole different discussion. But the realistic thing is that the Chevy is really quick and kind of fun to drive. The Nissan is not quick and fun to drive, but it has a lot more room. That is the realistic way of looking at these cars today. That is the least expensive thing. So a lot more expensive, basically $10,000 more to begin with than a very inexpensive gas vehicle.
So it's a 50% jump to get to EV.
That is correct. But there are a few things that your viewers need to know, just in case they don't know EVs. EVs are extremely cheap to own and run by comparison.
For now.
Let me give you an example, and then we're going to go to used vehicles just for a moment. I mean, this whole conversation could easily be about used car value.
Yeah.
Early COVID days, I bought my daughter a 2016 Nissan Leaf. It had the bigger battery, so it's a 30 kilowatt hour battery. About 100 miles range. New, but that drops. Degradation, another conversation. Since I bought it, I've had it for over 2 years now. I have put on new tires and windshield wiper fluid.
That's wonderful.
That's it.
Have you kept track of the cost of the energy?
Actually, I have.
And how's that been going
I
for you?
am at 30% of what I would pay, and I've estimated this because for my other websites that I work for. The equivalent Nissan Versa, which roughly speaking is the most efficient vehicle they sell. I am at 30% of what it would cost to run that, and that is just gas. In terms of maintenance, it's a whole different story.
I would agree on maintenance. You're paying a lot less for maintenance. The energy costs, the reason why I say for now, I see this changing as there's more demand on the EV infrastructure, and the government start to realize that they haven't reached that city on the hill of green energy and what it means to put all of that demand on a grid that can't support it, which is a discussion for another day.
That really is a discussion for another day.
I just want to put that pin in here as part of the discussion, because you may wake up one day, like people bought SUVs in 1996 when gas was $1.20 a gallon.
Right.
And then they woke up in 2001 and gas was $3 a gallon, or I forgot exactly when it went up that high, but that was a big jump, and I believe at some point you're going to have that jump in the EV world.
I won't disagree with you, but on top of that, I mean, there are people out there that are converting over to solar and finding ways of getting around some of that and making it a lot less expensive. And since I've moved into a home that does have solar, my rates have gone down significantly, so the car is even cheaper to run for now.
Okay, so let's try to make some conclusions here.
Yes.
What advice would you give to the person that was working at that restaurant we went to? The Mustard's Last Stand, that was it called.
Yeah, the Mustard's Last Stand.
What advice would you give that person, and then what advice would you give the person who's, let's say, let's 3 different people. The guy working at Mustard's Last Stand or whatever local food joint or Whole Foods market, the person that is the average American, meaning in debt, and then the person who is the baby steps millionaire, meaning the person who has no debt, who has a net worth of $1 million and above. What are the 3 different pieces of advice you would give them?
Okay, well, I think
if they needed a car today.
Okay, if they needed a car today. You have to answer a question, of course, of what their needs are. Do you really need something that can go 500 miles? Do you really need something that can only go 100 miles? That is an important question, because that can save them a lot of money, if you think about it. I think that there's a simple conclusion to come to, though. The least expensive cars that we discussed are both gas-powered. They both have continuously variable transmissions. They are essentially things that will not bring you joy in any way other than perhaps knowing that you didn't pay a lot of money. That's about it. But the other side of it is, and there is a reality here, they're cheap to insure, they're cheap to run, they're cheap to keep, and they're cheap to buy. I would imagine that person working at Mustard Last Stand, if they absolutely had to have a new car, that would be the direction they can go. And there are only a couple vehicles they could truly afford without absolutely murdering themselves. And even then, insurance rates for kids who are under 25, and most of these kids, it would be high. So there's that to take into account. I do recommend a inexpensive electric vehicle. It's my own personal opinion. I've scored
For
with
which
it.
person?
For the
The Mustard Last Stand?
Mustard Last Stand.
An inexpensive, really?
Just like my daughter has.
Okay, but that car
$9,000 for the car. $9,000.
Yeah, okay, that's as I was getting at.
Yeah.
It was $9,000 2 years ago. I got a friend of mine who's a pastor. I got him almost the same car, 2014, for $6,000.
Yeah, and
30,000
it was
miles.
cheaper, but that also had the smaller battery. The bigger battery wasn't
smaller
available.
battery, yeah.
But my point is that those cars, they don't hold their value very well. By the way, Nissan's not great for the snow belt.
Does that
the
mean
Leafs.
that the car will go to zero at some point because the battery will have no capacity?
No, I mean, no capacity.
Or diminished capacity.
It will drop continually, especially if it's not taken care of properly.
Like we found out the other night.
Well, that was my fault. I misjudged my mileage because you decided to go to Waffle House.
And we didn't get to go to Waffle House.
That's a whole different
That's
video.
a story for another day.
That's actually a pretty good video right there.
You know what? Maybe that'll be our little bit at the end.
Okay, fair enough. So, in all honesty, if you can calculate your mileage and figure it out for now, while the price is relatively low on power, those are great, inexpensive solutions for people who can manage to power them. If you live in a crappy apartment complex, you're not going to be able to run an extension cord there.
I would agree with you. If you are hand to mouth, and you had $6,000, $9,000 in cash to go buy. Now, he and I differ on this part of it. I say buy in cash. He sometimes.
I would
with
prefer
finance.
buying cash.
I prefer. Yeah,
Fair enough.
I am 100% buying
Yeah.
cash. That's the caveat I would give. But I would agree with you. If someone living in a city like Denver, Los Angeles, New York, maybe not North Carolina, because I found the charging network is not good there.
Right.
But where there is a network, that actually would be very affordable.
And especially if you can have a home base where you can plug it in. I've been running my kid's car on 110 almost exclusively since we bought it. We do have at my old house.
It takes a lot of patience.
It takes a lot of patience, but if you come home with 50% charge and plug that thing even into a 110 with this small battery, it's only 30 kilowatt hour, the next day you'll be full and ready to go. I've been driving that thing back and forth to Boulder almost every day. In fact, today was the first day I didn't drive it here. So it works. It simply
So your
works.
advice there, would it be more go used for that segment?
Indeed.
The folks, the Mustard Last Stand person.
Right, because they're not going to be able to afford a new electric vehicle right away. They're not going. They have to work their way up. A car like this that doesn't demand a lot out of them, provided that they plan in advance, they will be able to go to school. Most of these kids are going to Boulder or another school in this area, and they will be able to have their transportation. And then once they're done, once they get up to a certain point, perhaps once they finally land that job, they can sell the car off. And no, they're not going to make money on the car.
For the other direction of ICE, it sounds like there really isn't an affordable choice, even used, because you look at like Civics. A new Civic is minimum $22,000 at this point. Minimum. Used, you'd be lucky to find one for the high teens.
You are correct.
So it sounds like the EV is again, provided you can fit the mission, that's probably the most efficient, followed by whatever the cheapest piece of crap you can find on Craigslist. I would say used, not new for those folks.
Yeah.
What about the folks, the average guy, the average American who's making the average income? So we've gone from like someone who's making $30,000 a year to 63, 214.
Right.
And they probably are carrying debt. What would you suggest to them?
That is where this gray area comes in of being able to pay that cash and get a car straight for cash. They won't be able to do it. That person doesn't have the savings for it unless they are unmarried, don't have kids, most importantly, and have managed just to stock away money. So that means they're going to have to figure out financing. So it's more logical to me to get a new car versus a used car. The question is, can they sacrifice and not get all the toys? There are cars out there that you can get, as we proved, that are
A new car.
Yeah, a new car. This is my own opinion. But there are plenty of cars, as you mentioned, the Honda Civic and all that, smaller, inexpensive, perfectly good everyday drivers that you can do anything with in reality, that range between the low 20s and the low 30s. All right. Obviously, if they stick closer to the low 20s, they can get that, and they can hopefully pay that car off rapidly, especially if they go in with a nice fat down payment. I know you would rather them pay cash for it, but as I said, with that type of income, I suspect they won't have that much just sitting around, right? And so that would be my advice to them. I would not go used if I can avoid it. One main reason, maintenance. Almost every new car is coming with a maintenance
Yeah, even Toyotas,
standard.
and Hyundais, yeah, they are.
Right. They didn't before, and then you
Yeah.
had to pay, $300 to get new spark plugs or whatever after 25,000 miles. I mean, or belts, stuff like that. Now they're covering a lot of that.
But is that really worth it? You're effectively paying an extra $20,000 so you can avoid paying maybe $700 a year in maintenance.
Oh, I think it's more than 700 a year, and it depends on the year.
Well, if you're maintaining a car, it shouldn't cost you more than $500-$700 a year to do it.
It depends.
Within reason, not a Bentley Continental.
No,
but
no, I
like
know.
a Toyota Prius kind of a thing.
Yeah. Well, a Prius is a really good example, and I wish they still built the Prius C because that was a very affordable, very economical car that ran forever.
Yeah.
Easy to maintain,
All of
too.
them are. That brings us to my advice for this group. You're in debt for a reason. Get the hell out of debt. Don't buy a new car. Go and find a used Prius for like $8,000.
If you can.
I think you can. It's going to
they're
have
hard
miles.
yeah.
It's going to have miles, but it's a Toyota. It's not like my Supra we talked about. They aren't going to die. New York City taxis have been Priuses for years,
Yeah.
and they get 300,000-400,000 miles without issue.
Yeah, they're really
I'd
strong
say
cars.
For that average American who's making $63,000, your income is too great to be broke. Your income is too great to have debt, and if you want an affordable car in the future that's new, take the hit now and buy the used car. The thing won't die, and then start putting money away instead of paying interest on a new car or paying whatever the money factor is, which is interest on a lease. The big thing I'm trying to give you here is, some advice, but also let's marry it with let's get your financial house in order. So at the same time that one is saving money to buy a car, they're also getting out of debt. So later, they can have any car they want. They don't have to worry about whether I get a used EV or a used Prius or even a cheap pickup truck from Ford. If you want an F-150 Lariat with a sunroof and all kind of stuff, you can do it because you got money in the bank. Which brings us to the third group.
Right.
The guy who is the millionaire next door. He has no debt. He's not living in a fancy house. He's not living in Boulder, I can tell you that.
Oh, hell no.
But the guy who's living in your neighborhood, and he's got, a Kia Cadenza in his driveway paid for. He goes on a cruise with his wife every year. What's the advice you'd give him?
Well, you almost were there. Genesis.
Oh, okay.
Genesis.
So that's the affordable car for the millionaire next door.
That is exactly it. There is no reason. Lexus used to be that way, by the way, but Lexus has definitely gone up in terms of their the buy-in. But Genesis has already been their reliability so far over the past 6 years now, 7 years that they technically have been separate, has been pretty good, and their design is excellent. They're really well screwed together. They are as good as anything European, if not better, and they match the Japanese as far as I'm concerned, if not better. And their cars, by comparison, are inexpensive. So I would say that would be one of the first places I look because you really don't need, if he's living that lifestyle, he or she, I should say.
So progressive of you.
Thank you. But the point is that why do they have to become flashy with the car? If they don't want a flashy car, they can get a perfectly good car. Or forget all that. If they want even more reliability and they want a large sedan or something like that, while it's, I think, still being built but about to be discontinued, something like a Toyota Avalon.
Yeah, that's going to turn into the Toyota Crown.
Yeah.
A fun fact for you from my boy and yours, Dave Ramsey.
Okay.
He did a study of millionaires, and I found it fascinating. He ranked the brands of what kind of cars do millionaires actually drive. Take a guess what brand was in the top 3.
I would imagine Toyota.
Yes. Actually, no, not in the top 3. No.
Really?
No.
Not Honda?
No.
General Motors?
A General Motors product.
Buick.
A Buick. Can you believe that? It's like the number 3 brand that millionaires buy.
I can believe it because although things have changed with Buick recently, you and I would agree on that. I mean, they no longer build cars.
They don't.
That's rough in itself, but that's a whole different story.
I have told Bob Boniface to his face in his design studio, he needs to build that Wildcat concept.
It's beautiful, isn't it? Especially, you like the name, I know that. But anyway, the point is that Buicks have all the creature features you would want in a Caddy. They have all the comfort of a Caddy without being a Caddy, and nobody looks twice.
That's what they were back in the day. I don't think they have I don't think you can compare them positively to a Caddy at this point. If they brought the Wildcat back, sure.
All right,
but you look at look at what Cadillac's doing with the Lyric, and that's actually an example of an affordable EV. It's a lot of chair for $62,000. I know it's weird to say, but they have their own UX in that car now.
Yeah.
The design is bold. It's definitely polarizing, but it's bold. And I can't tell you the numbers of the all-wheel drive. It was shared with me by the chief engineer, but it's going to be a quick car.
But that has nothing to do with this millionaire you're talking about and Dave Ramsey, what he said about Buick. I am agreeing with Dave Ramsey, unlike you, who, Mr. Ramsey, this guy's disagreeing with you.
And
he's disagreeing with you.
Go to Nashville, too.
Yeah, well, there you go. So the point is that I would agree with the Buick thing. My sister owns one. And
Dave drives a Lexus. Yeah, it's him. That's not his wife's car.
We're not going to get specific with that, though. But the point is that I would agree with that because you still get, okay, maybe the UX in the Cadillac is a little bit more superior, but they do the same damn thing. The seats are just as comfortable in a Buick in many cases than they are in Cadillac or Mercedes-Benz and whatnot, minus maybe massage. Okay, I mean, come on.
I love you. I love Bob Boniface, but I believe Buick has lost its way.
I'm not going to disagree with that. I'm only talking about on the level of, as a buyer who, let's say, doesn't care so much about what they drive versus the fact that they want to be comfortable and something reliable. And actually, Buick's reliability numbers have been
off the
excellent.
chart. I think they're like number one in this area.
Either number or two. I think
and depending on the survey, because some of these surveys are bought and paid for, but the reality
is they're way up there. And they are better screwed together than Chevys, as far as I'm concerned, and they provide an awful lot for the money. And so I could see that as a millionaire who's like, you know what? I don't really need to be flashy, but I want to be comfortable, and I want something that's reliable, that's worth $1. Boom.
Okay.
I would say Toyota should be there too.
Toyota is like in the top 10.
Okay.
But for this millionaire list, it was more about Fords, Chevys, and Buicks were higher than Toyota was higher than Honda, but GM and Ford fared stronger in this survey of millionaires.
Okay.
And with that brings us to our. We're basically saying if you were on those. I think we're saying if you're in the first two buckets, meaning the guy working at Mustard's Last Stand and the average American that has debt, and most of you do, that's the guy that should be buying a used car.
Even
ideally,
in the crappy
a used EV.
Yeah.
If you can fit the mission. If not, something that's in the teens.
Yes.
In the case of the millionaire next door, a Genesis,
I think fantastic
Buick.
plan.
I would add Lexus, but I know I'm biased because I'm a Lexus guy. But this is the point of the episode. I think we should turn it around to them.
Yes.
What advice would you give
to these
same three people?
Yeah.
What would you do in their shoes? Let us know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoMan TV on word, MotoMan TV on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I think we should share a very quick version of our story of trying to get something to eat on Saturday night.
You want to know why I am completely bald? I had a full head of hair a few days ago. And then I hung out with MotoMan, had a cigar, and then he had the hankering for Waffle House.
I didn't know there was a Waffle House in Denver. That's a treat to me. That's high living.
So from that place, now I drive my daughter's car while she's in school. This is the Nissan Leaf I told you about. And I knew it was low on battery, but I knew I had enough to go to this cigar place and go home. But no, he wanted Waffle House. So we go out to the Waffle House. And they are filled beyond capacity, according to the poor pimple paste. The kid who came out, I'm sure there's a fire safety thing when there's only two people.
I'm convinced he doesn't like Greeks.
Okay. So he may have, and perhaps there was some other thing going on there. And if you do run a Waffle House, especially if you work in their legal department, please forget what he's just said. Anyway, continuing.
I'm calling my lawyer.
Once that was established and the little vein on the side of his head started popping out and he was ticked off, well, we got to find another one. Okay, well, there happens to be one by my house, which is 15 miles away. I hop in the car. I wasn't paying attention. I have 14 miles of range. So
true story.
We're on the highway, and I actually had to call him saying, we need to get off the road so I can regen enough to get it home. And 5 miles away from home, the poor little car went to completely empty to the point, well, it didn't stop, but it wouldn't even show me my range anymore, which is what the older ones do. Anyway, we get home. Hop into his car, go to Waffle House. Closed. Well, not closed.
No, same thing. No. Well, no, that one was
drive-through only.
And there was an armed guard in front of a Waffle House.
Yeah.
Wouldn't let us in and said, beat it.
My hood has a good side and a bad side. That's the bad side of the hood, and that's where we were. So the other side of his temple is now thumping. We're hungry. By the way, it is now about almost midnight. Almost midnight.
Oh, yeah, it's midnight, yeah.
Not quite yet, because he looks across. No. Then we decide, there's an In-N-Out Burger.
And they're open till 1:30 on Fridays.
Right. So,
at least in California.
Which is perfect for him to come from California and then want In-N-Out in Colorado.
I want In-N-Out. I wanted Waffle House.
So we go over to In-N-Out. Get in line, which is extraordinarily long. Shortly after we get in line, the lady, and they're short-staffed, the entire country's short-staffed, says, if you order now, it'll take you 20 minutes to get your food.
25.
So realistically, from the point where we were standing to the point where we get food would probably be between 45 minutes and an hour. So now if there's any other veins on his head popping, I can't even see him because he's so flamed red that we just charge out of there. Across the street is a chicken place.
Raising Cane's.
Right.
Food of the gods.
Food of the gods.
Not as good as Guthrie's, but food of the gods.
Throws me in the car. Takes off. Flies across the street. Pull into the driveway. As we pull up, the lights go off.
This is, if you're keeping count, four restaurants.
Now, and that's exactly at midnight, which makes sense. This restaurant, closed, lights off. So we're right across the street. Well, down the street, about a mile away, because it's all I could think of, and we passed it on the way there. There's an IHOP restaurant.
We ended up at IHOP, and again, it was half full. Not even half full.
Not even. There was like
and
4
the guy
tables.
says there's a wait because apparently the staffing shortage issue is a much bigger deal here.
Mm-hmm.
I found it here in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Than California. So here, the guy was like, and the guy was super cool.
He was super cool.
Super cool. And he was like, hey, man, sorry, but there's a wait. If you could just bear with me. And I'm like, you know what? I'll make you a deal. If you give me a Diet Coke, very little ice, I'll sit and wait. Had it out in 3 seconds. Seconds.
Yeah. That dude was just like on it. He wanted he wanted to please his customers. Rarely do you see that nowadays, by the way. So
in 3 hours from leaving the cigar lounge, we finally got something to eat.
I go into bed at 2 o'clock. Well, roughly around 2 o'clock in the morning. By the time I'm crawling into bed, my wife rolls over. I smell of cigars, and
which is a good thing.
She was displeased. The worst part was the next day I tried to blame the man. He was staying with us. She wouldn't buy it. It was my fault.
It is your fault.
No matter what, it's my fault.
It is. And on that note, until we see you in the next episode, be später.